Marcus Langford eased his black sedan down the narrow country road. The late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the rolling fields of green and gold. He kept his eyes on the road, but his mind wandered back to the day he first lost his son. Tyler had been lively and bright, always curious about the world. Marcus recalled the sound of his laughter, rising like music through their mahogany-paneled hall, and the way Tyler's small hand fit so perfectly into his own. And now that hand was gone, and with it any hope of a future together. As he drove, Marcus felt a quiet ache in his chest. He had built an empire from nothing, turning small investments into a vast network of businesses. Millions of dollars moved at his command every day. Yet none of that meant a thing without Tyler by his side. Marcus blinked to keep the tears at bay. He had always believed that wealth could solve any problem. But grief was not a problem money could fix. He rounded a gentle curve and spotted the gate to the cemetery. The entrance was modest, a simple iron arch crowned with curling letters spelling out Evergreen Rest. Rows of headstones stretched across the meadow, each marking a life once lived. Marcus turned off the engine and stepped out, closing the door with a soft click. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp earth, a smell that seemed fitting for this place of memory and loss. He carried a bouquet of white lilies, their petals still fresh from the florist. Tyler had loved lilies. Marcus remembered how Tyler would press his small nose into the flower, eyes closed in delight. He had called them starflowers. Now starflowers lay quiet in Marcus's hand, ready to rest on the stone where his son's name had been carved in precise letters. Marcus walked along the gravel path, boots crunching softly with each step. He paused before a headstone that shone under the sun. He knelt, arranging the lilies with careful hands so they framed the name. Tyler James Langford, April 12, 2008, September 5, 2023. He traced the curve of the letters with his finger, as if he could feel the impression of his son's life in the stone itself. He bowed his head and closed his eyes, offering a silent prayer. The cemetery was peaceful. A soft breeze rustled through the leaves of an old oak tree nearby. Birds called somewhere overhead. Marcus let himself stay in the stillness, remembering Tyler's last birthday. He had laughed as his friends chased bubbles across the lawn. He had unwrapped his gifts with bright eyes, declaring that this was the best party ever. Marcus's heart throbbed with the memory. He had wanted to protect his son from everything: illness, heartbreak, disappointment. He had built walls around Tyler's world with his money and influence, but life had found a way through, as life always does. The disease that struck Tyler had shown no mercy. Marcus had watched doctors and surgeons work in sterile rooms, offering hope one moment and despair the next. Then it was over. Marcus stood and straightened his suit coat, the fabric smooth beneath his fingertips. He felt the weight of his fortune slipping away, leaving him empty. He needed to see the grave, to tie himself to a memory that was all he had left. He walked a few steps deeper into the cemetery, intent on making his way back to the car, when he heard a soft sob. It came from somewhere nearby, unexpected in the quiet expanse. Marcus paused, the lilies still in his left hand. He listened. The sound grew clearer, woman's low, shuddering cry mixed with a child's whimper. Marcus hesitated. He had come here alone, expecting solitude. He did not know what would await him. Still his feet moved forward of their own accord, boots leaving shallow prints in the gravel. The sobbing led him to a small clearing between two modest plots. There stood a young black woman, her shoulders shaking as she bent low beside a tiny headstone. In her arms was a little boy, maybe 4 years old, his face streaked with tears. His head rested on his mother's shoulder, and he held a small toy car in his chubby hand. The scene caught Marcus off guard. He felt something twist inside him. At the sight of such raw grief, he took a gentle breath and cleared his throat softly. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were red and swollen. She stared at Marcus, confusion and alarm flickering across her features. The boy lifted his head and blinked at Marcus, and buried his face back into his mother's shoulder. Marcus gave a careful, respectful nod. He offered the lilies in his hand as a kind of gesture of peace. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and steady. "I didn't mean to intrude. I heard crying and wanted to make sure you were all right." The woman's eyes widened. She straightened slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She looked at the flowers. "Beautiful," she said, voice trembling. "Where did you get them?" "In the town florist," Marcus replied softly. "My son loved lilies." He hesitated, then added, "I lost him 2 years ago." The woman's face softened with sympathy. She looked down at her son's small grave. "I'm Jasmine," she said quietly. "This is David." She nodded toward the boy. "He died last week." She brushed her sleeve beneath her eyes. "We never see him coming back." Marcus felt a pang of recognition in her sorrow. He took another step forward, keeping his distance. "I can't imagine," he said, "but I know how empty it feels." Jasmine let out a short, bitter laugh. "Empty is right." She sank to her knees beside the grave. The little boy shuffled forward, placing the toy car on the grass. This was his favorite. Jasmine pressed a hand to his small back. Marcus watched them for a moment, feeling helpless. He had every resource, every privilege, yet here he was, powerless to ease another parent's grief. He thought of the tears he had held back for so long. He remembered sitting in his study, staring at a photo of Tyler, too proud to let anyone see him cry. But grief did not respect pride or power. Marcus knelt beside Jasmine at a respectful distance. He did not want to crowd her, but he wanted her to know he cared. He bowed his head and closed his eyes. "My heart goes out to you," he said. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Jasmine's shoulders shook again. She reached out, brushing the gravel where David's little feet had once stood. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat in silence. For a while, the sky began to shift from blue to orange as the sun dipped lower. The air grew cooler, and Marcus could see his breath in small puffs. Jasmine rocked her son gently, humming a lullaby. The melody was soft and sad, full of longing. Marcus felt his own eyes sting. He blinked hard and wiped at his cheek. Jasmine looked up, startled to see him tearful. She offered him a tissue from her pocket. He accepted it with a grateful nod. They were strangers, brought together by the same pain. Marcus realized how thin the line between their worlds truly was. Here, he was a billionaire, accustomed to luxury and control. There was Jasmine, a single mother struggling to get by. Yet here in this hollow of sorrow, they were equal in grief. The sobbing faded into quiet sniffles. Jasmine folded the tissue and tucked it away. She looked at Marcus. "You said you lost your son 2 years ago," she murmured. "I'm so sorry." Forced a small smile. "Thank you. Some days feel like yesterday." He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. Jasmine and David followed his lead. The little boy sniffled, but held his mother's hand tightly. Marcus picked up his lilies. "I should head back," he said softly. "Yes." Jasmine nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. She turned her gaze back to the headstone of her own son, Marcus. Took a last look at the two of them before turning toward the path. His heart felt heavy, but also strangely light, as if sharing his grief had let in a sliver of hope. He thought of Tyler, and of David, and of Jasmine's fierce love. He stepped onto the gravel, leaving the lilies and that shared moment of compassion behind him. As he walked away, Marcus knew he would return to Tyler's grave again, perhaps to this spot as well. For grief, he realized, carries us all, no matter our wealth or status. And sometimes, the simplest act of kindness can bridge worlds and heal a broken heart. Marcus Langford woke before dawn the next morning. Light filtered through the curtains of his penthouse bedroom, turning glass and steel into shades of soft gold. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, remembering Jasmine's voice and the small, crumpled locket she wore around her neck. He had seen it clearly in the fading light of the cemetery oval silver case with the letters TJL engraved inside. He had given that same locket to Tyler on his first birthday. He could not shake the thought that something about this woman's life had entwined with his own in a way he could not explain. He finally rose and dressed in a simple gray suit. Forgoing his usual designer tie for something more subdued, He moved through his morning routine with quiet purpose. He took his black coffee in his study, overlooking the city, ordered files from the secretary about the locket's disappearance at last year's charity gala, and instructed his assistant to track down every volunteer who had helped collect and distribute prizes that night. The locket had vanished in the shuffle of boxes and bags. He had assumed lost forever. But now it had resurfaced around the neck of a grieving single mother in a neglected corner of a rural cemetery. Marcus knew he needed to find Jasmine again. He could not tell her about his identity or wealth, at least not yet, but he needed to understand how his locket had come into her possession. He would help her, somehow, in honor of Tyler and David both. He grabbed his executive card and fed it into the elevator, descending through the sleek tower until he reached the curb. Outside, his driver thumbed the car door open. They set off for the foundation offices. Meanwhile, Jasmine Carter tried to hold herself together. She had barely slept since returning from the cemetery. Her apartment was small, 2 rooms above an old laundromat where she lived with her daughter Amy, who was away at her grandmother's for the week. Without David, the silence in the apartment felt like a weight pressing in on her chest. She longed for the steady presence of someone who understood, someone who had lost a child too. But she felt embarrassed by her own poverty, her old couch stained with coffee spills, her stove missing a burner. She had scraped together enough to bury David, thanks to a fundraiser at her church and a sympathetic neighbor. But the wrestling with bills and food stamps continued. That afternoon, Jasmine made her way to the church basement for the weekly food pantry. She stood in line behind other single mothers, elderly men in patched coats, and a young family with twins. When her turn came, she selected cans of soup, a bag of rice, and a loaf of day-old bread. The volunteer handed her a small box with toiletries and diapers. She thanked him and looked down at the locket around her neck. It felt cold against her skin. She ran her thumb over its smooth surface, the letters almost worn away by time. How long had she had it? She could not remember. But she remembered wearing it when David had died, feeling it was a piece of his memory she could hold close, as Jasmine paid a neighbor to watch her 3-year-old niece for an hour. She made a detour toward the community center. She had seen a flyer for a grief support group meeting there. She had resisted the idea of talking to strangers about her pain, but the memory of Marcus's kind eyes and his shared tears made her think maybe she should try. She entered the old brick building and found a circle of folding chairs in a plain room. A woman stood at the front with a gentle smile, inviting newcomers to introduce themselves. Jasmine froze. She thought maybe this was too much. Then she felt a tap on her shoulder and looked up to see Marcus standing there, looking as out of place as she felt. "Hello, Jasmine," Marcus said softly. Her heart thudded in her chest. "I hope you don't mind. I came as well." She stared. At him, he took a seat 2 chairs down, leaving space between them. He looked as vulnerable here as he had in the cemetery, not like the powerful man she imagined he must be. The woman leading the group asked, "Would you like to share your name and your story?" Jasmine shook her head, no tears already welling. In her eyes, Marcus raised his hand. "My name is Marcus. I lost my son, Tyler, 2 years ago. This week I met Jasmine and her little boy in the cemetery, and I realized grief doesn't care who we are. It just hurts." He looked at Jasmine. "I wanted to try this. Maybe sharing might help." After that, Jasmine found her fears softening. She realized that people from different worlds shared the same pain. She stood up and whispered her name. She spoke of David, how he had loved toy cars, how he called her mommy hero, how he had fallen asleep in her arms after telling her he loved her for the first time. Tears tumbled down her cheeks as she spoke, and friends reached out to pat her back. When she finished, Marcus nodded with empathy, tears in his own eyes. Jasmine felt less alone. Later, as the group disbanded, Marcus approached Jasmine. "I'm sorry for interrupting your space," he said, "but I saw that locket. It belongs to my family. I think it was misplaced after last year's event. I'd like to get it back to where it belongs and to hear more about you and David, if that's okay." Jasmine's jaw dropped. "Me and you? You gave that to your son?" she stammered. "Yes," Marcus said. "At his first birthday, 8. It was a gift from my wife and me. 8. I didn't know it was lost until I met you. Jasmine pressed a hand to her mouth. I can't believe it. Over the next hour, Jasmine and Marcus sat on a bench outside the center. Marcus told her how Tyler had worn the locket every day, how proud he had been to show it off at preschool. Jasmine told Marcus how she had found the locket in a donation bag someone left at her church. She said she wore it because she felt drawn to it like it was something precious to keep safe. She had never opened it until Marcus mentioned the initials. Opening it had brought a flood of memories she could not explain. She showed him the tiny photo inside a grainy black and white image of a baby with bright eyes. She wiped the tears that fell as she spoke. They sat in silence for a few moments. The busy street hummed around them, but in that bubble of conversation, the world felt suspended. Marcus realized he did not want to simply reclaim his locket and walk away. He wanted to help Jasmine, to honor the memory of both Tyler and David by doing something meaningful. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. "My foundation," he said, handing it over. "We support families in crisis. I'd like you to consider us part of your support network. No strings attached." Jasmine looked at the card, her hands trembling. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Marcus replied. "Just promise me you'll let us help." That evening, as Marcus returned to his office, he felt a shift inside him. He had faced his own grief in the empty halls of this tower, wondering if he could ever smile again. Now, he had found purpose. Use his resources to lift up a mother and her daughter who had already lost so much. He began reviewing proposals for a new grant program aimed at single parents who had lost children, determined to make sure no one else felt as isolated as he had in his worst moments. At her apartment, Jasmine sat at her kitchen table, the card clutched in her hand. The space was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Plates and cups lay scattered across the counters, evidence of the simple cafeteria meal she had hurried through. She looked at the card again. It felt too good to be true that a man of privilege would offer help without wanting anything in return. She thought of Amy, sleeping at her grandmother's, and how she could buy new shoes for school or pay for extra tutoring. She swallowed hard and dialed the number on the card. "Hello?" A warm voice answered. Jasmine swallowed again. "This is Jasmine Carter," she said. "I'm calling about the offer from Marcus Langford's foundation." Silence followed, and the voice said, "Yes, Ms. Carter. Thank you for reaching out. How can we help you today?" As she explained her situation, her rent overdue, her need for childcare so she could work full-time, the voice responded with kindness and concrete solutions. Yes. Jasmine felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. She thanked the person, promising to follow up, before hanging up. Jasmine whispered, "Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Marcus. I will make this count." That night, both Marcus Langford and Jasmine Carter lay awake thinking of the other. One in a high-rise overlooking the city lights, the other in a modest flat lit by a single lamp. Both felt a flicker of hope, born from shared sorrow and unexpected kindness. They did not yet know how deeply their lives would intertwine, but each knew that grief had brought them together and that compassion would guide them forward. Marcus Langford sat in his high-rise office, sunlight glinting off the glass walls, but his mind felt clouded. He flipped through a volunteer roster from last year's charity gala, searching names and notes for any hint about the lost locket. Every entry on the spreadsheet looked the same, last names only, handwritten initials, vague descriptions like jewelry or small items. He tapped his pen on the desk in frustration. How could something so precious vanish into thin air among thousands of donations? He leaned back and closed his eyes, remembering Jasmine's face when he first mentioned the locket. The disbelief in her eyes had turned to wonder. When she showed him the tiny photo of David inside, it felt like two worlds had collided. He could still hear the soft tremor in her voice as she asked if the locket belonged to his son. He knew. Then he would move heaven and earth to make sure no other child's memory slipped away. After reviewing the roster, Marcus called his assistant. "Clara, I need you to reach out to every volunteer from that event," he said. "Ask if they remember collecting jewelry, donations, especially small boxes or pouches. Leave nothing out. Clara nodded and set to work. Marcus watched her typing fast. A familiar comfort settling in. He had solved bigger puzzles than this. Yet his heart twisted, knowing this time the prize was not a deal or a trophy, but a mother's memory. Meanwhile, Jasmine Carter woke early, to the sound of her old heater clicking on. Winter was approaching, and nights felt colder since David's passing. She moved to the small kitchen and filled a kettle for tea, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. She thought of Tyler's silver locket lying in her hand, her most precious possession, and wondered what Marcus's plan was. He hesitated. To trust a man she barely knew, but something in his eyes had felt honest, as if he understood what it meant to hold on to grief. Jasmine's first task of the day was to meet with a caseworker from Marcus's foundation at the community center. She gathered the documents she had managed to collect, her lease agreement, proof of income, and a list of debts owed. Stepped into the modest office. She found a young woman waiting with a warm smile. "Jasmine Carter?" she asked. Jasmine handed over the papers, feeling a mix of relief and fear. Relief that help might come. Fear of being judged for every late rent payment and every round of credit calls. The caseworker, Ms. Lopez, looked through the files with care. "I've been through so much," she said softly. "I'm going to submit these for assistance. Cover your rent arrears for 3 months and help with utility bills. You can also arrange childcare support so you can take that full-time job you mentioned." Jasmine felt tears welling up. She blinked, forcing them back. "Thank you," she whispered. "I just want to give Amy a stable life." Ms. Lopez nodded. "We're here to make sure you can focus on healing and work, not on worrying every night." Later that day, Marcus's assistant called to report progress. "Clara here. I've reached 15 volunteers so far. Only to remember jewelry pickups, but they can't find any records." Marcus sighed. He paced the office, thinking. If the trail had gone cold, how would he explain it to Jasmine? He thought of her standing in the cemetery, clutching that locket like a lifeline. He knew he could not give up. He decided to visit the foundation's warehouse himself. The warehouse was a large, dim-lit room with rows of shelves stacked with boxes donated after every event.
Yes.
He signed in at a small desk and was led by Mr. Davis, the warehouse manager. Boxes were labeled by date and category: clothes, books, toys, household items. Jewelry was supposed to have been sent separately to a secure area, but the records showed no entry for that evening. Marcus frowned. "Have you ever had mislabeled items?" he asked. Davis shrugged. "Sometimes volunteers mix things up. Sir, we find odd things in clothes bins sometimes." They moved down an aisle marked miscellaneous. Marcus watched Davis open a box labeled linens. Inside, among folded sheets, lay a small velvet pouch. Marcus's heart thumped. He put on white gloves and reached in. There it was, his son's locket. The silver caught the light and the initials TJL were clearly visible. He gently lifted the pouch. "This is it," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Davis looked surprised. "That ended up here." "I don't know why it was in this box. It must have come in last." Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Davis. You've just solved a very personal problem for me." He slipped the pouch into his jacket, pocketed and made his way back to the city. His mind raced with plans to return the locket to Jasmine in a way that honored both families. That evening, Marcus arranged for a small private dinner at a quiet cafe near the community center. He liked to keep a low profile in public, wearing simple clothes and a cap pulled low. He sat at a corner table, examining the locket in its pouch. He thought about what he would say to Jasmine, how he would explain that her kindness in wearing the locket had preserved his son's memory when he feared it was lost forever. Across town, Jasmine worked late on a report for her new supervisor. She had started the full-time job her foundation grant made possible, a position at a local non-profit, helping other single parents. The work was fulfilling but exhausting. As she packed her bag, her phone buzzed with a message. "Dinner, Lille PM, Calf Magnolia." Marcus. She hesitated. She did not know how to feel about meeting him one-on-one. She owed it to the locket, and maybe to her own heart, to see him again. She took a deep breath and typed, "Okay, See you at 6. At exactly 6, Jasmine arrived at the cafe. She wore a simple dress and a coat that hugged her thin frame. She scanned the room and saw Marcus standing by the window, the locket pouch in his hand. He waved her over. Her heart fluttered as she walked to the table. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said, standing to pull out her chair. He placed the pouch gently on the table. Jasmine reached for it with trembling hands. He waited, giving her space. She opened the pouch and lifted the locket. Its weight felt familiar on her fingers. She opened it and stared at the photo of baby Tyler. Marcus tucked his hands on the table. "Jasmine, I'm so grateful to you. You kept this safe when I had lost hope of ever finding it. I know it must have meant a lot to you too." Jasmine pressed her lips together. "It did. I wore it because I lost my son, David. I thought maybe carrying something precious would make me feel close to him." She closed the locket. "I never knew it was Tyler's gift." They talked for a long time, sharing stories of their boys. Marcus told her about Tyler's first steps, his love of building blocks, and how he called his mother Sunshine. Jasmine told him about David's bright laugh, how he insisted on wearing a superhero cape, and how he called his mother My Heart. Over cups of herbal tea, they laughed through tears. They found comfort in the similarities, the way both boys clung to small treasures, the way both mothers and fathers had fought to protect them. By the end of the evening, the cafe lights dimmed for closing. Jasmine asked, "What will you do with the locket now?" Marcus smiled softly. "I want to give it a place of honor in my home, but I also want you to have a copy of the photo inside. And I want the story of how it was lost and found our story to be remembered." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a printed photo of the locket and a note. "For you, with thanks." Jasmine looked at the note, tears shining in her eyes. She folded the photo and slipped it into her bag. "Thank you, Marcus," she whispered. "This means more than you know." As they stepped out into the cool night air, they walked side by side under the street lamps. The city was quiet, but Jasmine felt a new sense of hope in her chest. Marcus felt lighter than he had in years. In that moment, the silver locket was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a bridge between two grieving hearts, a symbol of unexpected connection, and the start of a new chapter neither of them could have planned. Marcus Langford woke the next morning with the memory of last night's conversation fresh in his mind. He sat at his desk in the home office he rarely used, staring at the locket pouch beside his computer. It felt like a tiny treasure chest, holding more than metal and photos it held to families' histories. He picked up the phone and called his foundation's volunteer coordinator. "Ms. Rivera." "Good morning, Marcus," she answered. "How can I help today?" I'd like to know who delivered the donations after that gala," Marcus said softly. "Please look for the volunteer who packed the jewelry box." Ms. Rivera paused. "We keep a log of donation teams. Trace it back and get you a name by midday." "Thank you," Marcus replied. He replaced the phone and leaned back. For years, he had managed businesses worth millions. Tracking down a misplaced bracelet would have been easy. A lost locket was harder because it meant so much more. He had to know how it ended up in Jasmine's hands. It mattered. A few hours later, Ms. Rivera emailed a brief note. The team leader was a college student named Laura Kim. Laura had volunteered with her sorority and packed jewelry items into a silver-trimmed box marked security items. After the gala, she and her friends took the box to the donation tent. The driver loaded it into a van bound for the foundation warehouse. Marcus recognized the name. Laura was the daughter of an old friend who had once sat on his board. He called her father, who connected him to Laura. Within the hour, Laura met Marcus at the foundation offices. She looked nervous, holding a cup of tea as they talked in his conference room. "I am so sorry about your son," Laura said quietly. "I heard you lost something important." Her eyes brimmed with sympathy. "Yes," Marcus said. "Lost this locket until yesterday until Jasmine found it." He showed her the pouch. Laura leaned forward and took it gently. "I remember packing this," she said. "We sorted jewelry that evening and placed each piece in small velvet bags. I thought this one was a donation from a guest. We never opened the bags. Marcus nodded, and it went to the secure warehouse area. I dumped it. Somehow it got mixed into the linens box. Laura's shoulders slumped. I can't believe it. I'm sorry it caused so much trouble. It's not your fault, Marcus said kindly. You and your team did your best. I just wanted to know the path it took. Marcus watched her recover. She smiled a little. I'm glad it's back, where it belongs. That afternoon, Marcus drove to Jasmine's neighborhood. He parked a block away, slipping into plain clothes and sunglasses. He carried a simple brown paper bag. He parked a block at dup. Quote da da to da ta da to da to da to da ta da to 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 say all when and rinse it. I'm so gonna man and owls up by while I'm on 17 puck off. The check was for Jasmine's funeral expenses for David. It's a cost that the church fundraiser had covered, but funds that often left hidden bills behind. He added an extra amount for any unforeseen costs. Jasmine was at the community center meeting with Miss Lopez about her childcare arrangement. Marcus waited in the lobby until Jasmine emerged, her hair tied back and her coat buttoned up against the cool breeze. He stepped forward. Jasmine, he said. She paused, surprised to see him holding flowers. Marcus, she said, voice soft. What brings you here? I wanted to return something else, he said, handing her the bag, and offer some help with the funeral expenses for David. Jasmine looked inside at the lilies and then at the check. Oh, I can't accept this, she said quickly, shaking her head. You've already done so much. I know, Marcus replied, but I want you to have peace of mind. Funerals leave costs we often don't see. Let me cover them. He smiled gently. No strings. Just a gift from one parent to another. Jasmine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Pride flared. But love for her son overpowered it. You, she whispered. This means so much. Marcus nodded. There's more. I'd like to set up a small trust for Amy's education. He handed her another envelope. Inside was a letter explaining the trust and how to access it when the time came. Jasmine's eyes widened. I don't know what to say. Say. You'll let me do this, Marcus said. It's for David's memory and for Amy's future. Tears slipped down Jasmine's cheeks. She took the envelope. I will accept, she said softly. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
They talked briefly about Amy's school and Jasmine's hopes for her daughter. Marcus listened as Jasmine spoke of Amy's bright imagination and her love for drawing. In those moments, Marcus felt connected to Jasmine not just by grief, but by shared hopes for the next generation. Over the next week, Jasmine and Marcus worked together to straighten out the funeral details. Jasmine met with the funeral home director, with Marcus's check in hand. She chose the songs, the flowers, and the readings. She selected a simple, heartfelt program featuring David's favorite stories. Each decision felt heavy, but she carried the weight with grace. Meanwhile, Marcus organized the trust documents, making sure the legal paperwork was clear and simple. He instructed his lawyers to keep the process transparent, so Jasmine would never feel confused or trapped. It was important to him that his generosity not breed guilt. On the day of the funeral, the small country church was filled with neighbors, friends, and volunteers who had rallied around Jasmine. He sang gentle hymns and shared stories of David's laughter and kindness. Shoulders steady as she welcomed everyone. She held Amy's hand tightly, her daughter dressed in a little white coat with her own small bouquet. Marcus sat quietly in one of the back pews, his suit humble and his cap low. He watched Jasmine speak during the eulogy, describing how David loved to build towers with blocks and insisted on bedtime stories every night. Her voice wavered at first, then grew strong as she remembered his brightest moments. Tears filled her eyes, but she met each gaze in the crowd and spoke with love. After the service, people gathered in the hall for a simple reception. Jasmine drifted through the room, thanking each person for their kindness. She smiled at Marcus when she saw him by a table of refreshments. He offered her a cup of coffee and a plate of cookies. They talked quietly, sharing a comfortable silence between them. "I'm glad you're here," Jasmine said. "I don't know how I would have done this alone." "Dear." "You're very strong," Marcus replied. "But even the strongest people need a hand sometimes." As the afternoon light waned, Jasmine and Amy walked with Marcus to the car. Amy clutched a small stuffed bear, a gift from the foundation. Jasmine buckled her into the car seat. "Thank you," she said again. "Everything?" Marcus closed the car door gently. "You're welcome," he said. He paused, then added, "We'll check in on you and Amy if that's okay." Jasmine nodded. "I'd like that." Over the next weeks, Marcus continued to visit Jasmine and Amy, not as a distant benefactor, but as a friend. He brought groceries, helped repair loose boards in her porch, and even taught Amy to draw simple block shapes on a sketch pad. As he watched Jasmine's resilience, he felt his own wounds heal a little. Jasmine found new strength too. She discovered she could accept help without losing her dignity. She saw that kindness could bridge worlds. She saw a future for Amy that felt brighter. She saw that grief, while always present, did not have to define her life. One evening, Marcus and Jasmine sat on her porch, watching the sun set behind the laundry machines below. Amy played with blocks on the steps. Jasmine held a cup of tea, and Marcus sipped his coffee. The air was cool, but their shared warmth kept the chill away. Jasmine looked at Marcus. "I never expected any of this," she said. "I lost David and thought my life was over." Marcus nodded. "I lost Tyler and thought mine was too. But sometimes, loss brings something new, connections we never saw coming." Jasmine smiled softly, grateful for our meeting at Evergreen Rest. "Me too," Marcus said. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching Amy stack blocks carefully. In that moment, neither wealth nor poverty mattered. Two parents, bound by love and loss, sat together under a sky moving from orange to deep blue. They knew the road ahead would have good days and hard ones, but they knew they would not walk it alone. Together, they had found hope in the midst of grief and kindness in the wake of sorrow. And that was a beginning neither of them would ever forget. Marcus Langford stepped onto the gravel path of Evergreen Rest Cemetery one last time, the late afternoon light soft on his face. He held a single white lily in his hand. His heart felt lighter than it had when he first arrived here weeks before. He walked slowly toward the small plot where Tyler's headstone stood. The grass was trimmed and neat, and Jasmine had arranged fresh flowers at the base. The sight filled Marcus with both sadness and warmth. He knelt and placed his lily next to the other blooms. He traced the engraved letters of Tyler's name with his fingertip, remembering his son's bright smile and endless energy. He rose and turned toward the spot where Jasmine's family had their new headstone for little David. Jasmine and Amy were not here today, but Marcus felt their presence as if light passed between them. He bowed his head and whispered a quiet thought for Jasmine, for her courage, and for Amy's bright future. He could almost hear Jasmine's voice in the breeze, comforting and strong. When he stood again, he saw Jasmine approaching from the parking area. She carried a small wooden box. Amy followed, clutching her mother's hand. She wore a ribbon of deep blue, the same color she had picked for her little sister's trust opening ceremony. Jasmine smiled when she saw Marcus and waved. "How are you?" Marcus asked, stepping aside to let them reach the graves. "I'm good," Jasmine said softly. "Today is the day I wanted to share something with you." She knelt before David's marker and set the wooden box gently on the grass. Amy climbed onto her mother's lap, and Jasmine opened the lid. Inside lay a small, framed photograph of David wearing a bright red jacket and laughing as he ran through puddles. Next to it was a silver spoon, David's favorite from breakfast. "Time." Jasmine touched the spoon tenderly. "This belonged to David," she said, her voice steady. "I wanted to give you something from him. Akwe felt a lump in his throat as he picked up the spoon and held it carefully. The metal was warm in his hand. He looked at the photograph. David's eyes sparkled with mischief, and his grin was full of life. Marcus felt tears swell behind his eyelids. "This means so much to me," he said. "Thank you." Jasmine closed the box. "It feels right to share his memory this way," she said. "We've given each other so much already." "A piece of David's world," Marcus nodded. "And you have the promise of Tyler's memory staying alive?" He placed the spoon inside his coat pocket next to the locket. They sat on a nearby bench, the late sun painting the sky in gentle pinks and golds. Amy played at their feet, arranging fallen leaves in little piles. Marcus looked at Jasmine. "Been thinking about what comes next," he said. "We've done so much to heal, but I want to do more." Jasmine looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I want to create a small memorial garden here," Marcus explained. "A place where families who have lost a child can come, plant a flower or a small tree, and feel a sense of peace. I want it to be simple, but full of life." Jasmine's eyes lit up. "It's beautiful." She reached out and squeezed his hand. "I would love to help."
Oh!
Over the next weeks, they worked with the cemetery staff and local volunteers. Marcus funded the project, but Jasmine guided the design with her own gentle touch. Together they chose native flowers that bloomed in spring and trees that promised shade in summer. Each plant reflected hope and growth. They added wooden benches and small stone plaques where parents could engrave a name or a message by the time autumn arrived. The memorial garden had taken shape. The first ceremony was simple. A dozen families attended, each carrying a small plant or rose, a daisy, a young sapling. Marcus and Jasmine stood side by side, welcoming each family. When a mother knelt by a newly dug hole, Jasmine guided her in planting a marigold. When a father looked lost among the rows of green, Marcus offered a gentle word and a warm smile. Amy ran through the garden, her laughter bright among the flowers. She stopped by a rosebush planted in memory of David and placed a small toy car. Beside it, Jasmine watched with tears and pride as her daughter honored her brother in her own childlike way. Marcus felt his own tears and brushed them away. He realized grief and joy could live together. After the ceremony, Jasmine and Marcus walked along the winding path. The air was crisp, and leaves rustled overhead. They found the bench where they first talked about building this place. Marcus sat and patted the spot beside him. Jasmine joined him, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the distant voices of families and the whisper of the wind. "I never imagined any of this," Jasmine said softly. "I thought grief would swallow me forever." Marcus nodded. "Grief changes you," he said. "But it doesn't have to define your life." He looked at her with gratitude. "You showed me that." Jasmine smiled. "And you've showed me that kindness can come from the most unexpected places." They stayed until the garden gates closed, then walked together to the car. As they drove away, Amy fell asleep in the back seat, worn out from running among the flowers. Jasmine reached back and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. Marcus watched in the rearview mirror, feeling a deep sense of peace. Over the following months, Memorial Garden became a quiet haven for many. Parents brought picnics, children played among the blooms, and tears turned to smiles as families shared stories of hope. Marcus and Jasmine visited often. Sometimes they walked in silence, other times they spoke of the future. Marcus continued to support Jasmine's work at the nonprofit, and Jasmine invited him to speak at their annual fundraiser. He told the audience about the power of shared grief and shared healing. One afternoon, as winter neared, Jasmine invited Marcus and Amy to her apartment for hot cocoa and cookies. The small space was cozy, warmed by a space heater and filled with laughter. Amy showed Marcus her latest drawings: flowers, trees, families holding hands. Jasmine watched them and felt her heart swell. Marcus turned to Jasmine. "You've given me more than I ever dreamed," he said. "You taught me that life grows even after loss. You and Amy showed me how to heal." Jasmine smiled and reached for his hand. "And you gave me a future for my daughter," she replied. "You gave us hope. They sat together as the first snowflakes drifted past the window. Outside, the world turned white. Inside, they felt warmth and connection. The next spring, as flowers began to bloom in the garden, Marcus asked Jasmine to join him for a walk. He carried a small box. They reached the garden bench, the same spot where they first sat together. Marcus knelt and opened the box. Inside rested a simple silver band. "Jasmine Carter," he said softly, "you showed me kindness when I needed it most. You taught me about hope and love beyond wealth or status. I want to spend my life honoring that lesson. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Jasmine's eyes. Amy, nearby, gasped and covered her mouth in delight. Jasmine looked at Marcus, the man, who had once knelt alone beside his son's grave, transformed by love into someone able to love again. She placed her hand on his cheek and whispered, "Yes." They embraced among the blooming flowers, two souls bound by grief and by joy. Amy ran forward, hugging them both. The garden seemed to bloom brighter around them, as if every petal and leaf celebrated their promise. Marcus and Jasmine walked hand in hand back to the bench. They sat, watching the garden alive with new life. They knew sorrow would visit again, but they also knew they would face it together. They had built a place of healing not just for themselves, but for countless others. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the blooms, Marcus and Jasmine shared a quiet promise, the promise of love, hope, and the certainty that even in loss, life could grow. And for Tyler and David, their memories lived on in every flower, every tree, in the hearts of two families forever changed by grief and kindness.